I'd like to welcome our first guest speaker. She is no stranger to the PYA scene. She is a former UN lawyer, studied at Oxford, member of the Green Party, and author of her biography, Know Your Place. You may have seen her at various Palestinian protests or perhaps heard of her and her party's motion to recognize statehood through a two-state solution. And so for the next 10 minutes, I welcome Golriz Ghahraman to shed some light on tonight's ethos.
Inga mana, inga reo, inga karangatanga maha, tana koutou katoa. I do want to start as we have tonight by acknowledging that we are right now on a settler colony on land that was never ceded, and the connection between tangata whenua and the Palestinian people as another occupied peoples. I speak every time I speak on this issue as a Middle Eastern woman and a refugee, and I know that I do that every time I speak on any issue, but on this one, I do want to also, especially because of the theme of this year's Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people being Palestinian human rights, I do want to also bring a little bit of my professional expertise, having acted on UN human rights courts and international criminal courts. I almost hate the word apartheid, and I kind of hate the word colony because I think they sanitize what we're talking about. We're talking about mass crimes. We're talking about ethnic cleansing and murder. We're talking about maiming of children and women and men and the elderly. We're talking about theft of land and resource en masse over decades, generations of people being under military rule by one of the world's most powerful militaries. And, you know, when people talk about the cause of the Palestinian people, sometimes you get asked, you know, why don't you talk about other wars? You know, there are other wars happening and there's drought and famine. And I think one of the things that really captures the hearts and minds of those of us who work on this issue is the incredible disparity of power. To watch those little Palestinian kids throwing rocks and growing up, not being allowed to dream, faced by tanks and the most highly weaponized, highly technologically advanced military in the world that's sniping people's eyes out. The injustice is really palpable to us no matter where we are in the world. And these are international crimes. They are war crimes. They are crimes against humanity. And it is ethnic cleansing. I don't even think that the aim is apartheid, because that is two separate peoples living together under unjust and different laws. I think what's happening in particular in Gaza and what we're seeing in East Jerusalem over this past year is ethnic cleansing. So that's why we're here. And I think the human rights violations are grave, but also as a Middle Easterner, as a refugee, I do want to hold the humanity of the Palestinian people as central to this, because I know that we get dehumanized, and that is why our lives matter less. And as a Kiwi, I want us to remember every time we talk about the Palestinian cause that on March 15th in 2019, we did say they are us. And we did say that we stand against prejudice and against hate and against division. And I just want to hold the fact that as Middle Easterners, we know exactly where that hate and that division came from. It's from the portrayal of us as terrorists, as violent, as faceless masses that just are always going to live in war, that are always just going to be a bit backwards and too religious and too oppressed. And that's what justifies what Israel is doing. That's what has always justified the profiting from our misery and oppression. But Palestinians are scientists, are human rights lawyers, are singers and artists and poets and writers. And they have hopes and dreams, weddings and birthday parties and fashion design. I've left my black and white one in Wellington and I'm in lockdown. But that's what we're fighting for. We're fighting for a future for a people that are part of humanity and vibrant and will be vibrant and will be free, which is why I focused my motion in Parliament on Palestinian statehood earlier in the year, when we could, and we always do, we do call out Israel, and we do, and one of the things that as a lawyer just tears me apart is the children being arrested over and over again, and that is aimed at killing their spirit, but it's also illegal. So yes, there are those human rights abuses, but actually it's time to look forward, and it is time to stand on the right side of history. As a government, as a parliament, there wasn't consensus on Palestinian statehood, even though every single party in parliament right now, in New Zealand's parliament, says that it's their policy to support a two-state solution. Well, one of those states already exists. So I completely agree. We can't talk about both sides. We can't talk about the rights of both. If we're going to build a future, if we're going to be part of a pathway to peace, to Palestinian sovereignty, to Palestinian universities and hospitals and roads and schools and a future for those kids, we have to say the words, the state of Palestine. And that has to come from our parliament as a whole. The time for Labour and National and ACT MPs to say that this is their policy is over. They have to stand up and say it in parliament. They have to vote that way. So I did put a motion that I want to read, because this is what was rejected. And I can say that Te Pāti Māori did support it, but they weren't on business committee, so they didn't get to. This is what I was hoping for today. So I'll just read it for us, and next time we will read it in Parliament. So I would move that this House, that's New Zealand's House of Representatives, recognise that 29 November is the United Nations Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, and that it express its concern to recent events in the region, including the breaches of United Nations resolutions, including Resolution 2334, co-sponsored by New Zealand, recognising that settlements gravely breach international law, undermine the right of the Palestinian people to statehood, and thereby the two-state solution, and pose significant risks to regional security. That's so basic. That doesn't even scratch the surface. The reason we have those wordy numbers and the UN resolutions in there is because New Zealand is actually a party to the United Nations. We are a party to those resolutions. We can't say we stand for humanity or human rights or decolonization or equality on the world stage in the middle of this pandemic unless we can actually stand by our United Nations membership as good international citizens. So I'll keep trying, because the Palestinian people deserve us to honor the laws that we say we abide by. And because those kids throwing the rocks deserve to have dreams, just like Kiwi kids have dreams here. So kia ora.